I've been looking very closely at the property market in Wilmington, Delaware. It's not somewhere I would myself prefer to live. In fact, not many people do prefer to live there, least of all the people who actually have to live there. But it is the site of a house in which the landlord is charging $50,000 a month in rent to his own son. Now, I can tell you with a degree of expertise that the average rent for a house that size in Wilmington, Delaware is $2,200 per month. And yet, that tenant is getting $50,000 from his own son. How does that work? Well, first you need to know that the tenant is the ever so reliable cove Hunter Biden, he of the laptop, he of the garage, where highly secret, utterly confidential, and very, very explosive documents about Ukraine and, interestingly, about the UK. Maybe they were just going through it alphabetically, but papers on the UK and on Ukraine were carefully stashed under the careful stewardship of a crackhead discharged from the American military for dishonorable conduct. A man who filmed himself quarreling about a gram or two of crack cocaine on which he had been short-changed before cavorting with a very, very young prostitute, all on his own camera, all on his own laptop. Of course, he's just the man to leave in charge of top-secret American military, political, and diplomatic documents. But what if it wasn't really a rent? I'm the father of 6 children. I can't imagine me charging any of my children to live in my house, and if I did, I might charge them an amount to cover the mortgage, but Joe Biden doesn't have a mortgage. I might charge them the amount that it might cost to heat and have running water and so on in the premises. But $50,000 a month sounds a bit like money laundering to me and to many others in the US Congress, but not yet in the FBI. What if it wasn't really $50,000 worth of rent, but a passing on to, I don't know, the big guy, whoever he is, of a payment on a business deal, possibly a corrupt business deal? Well, a clue can be found in the fact that precisely $50,000 a month was being paid to Hunter Biden from a foreign commercial entity based in Sweden. So every month, Hunter Biden got $50,000 and paid his father $50,000 in rent for a 3-bedroom house in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, you'd think the FBI would be interested in that. Interested enough to perhaps, I don't know, raid the house. Perhaps interested enough not to allow Biden's own lawyers to do the searching and bring the documents, or some of the documents, into the FBI. You'd think the FBI might turn up with a camera crew, you know, like they did in Mar-a-Lago, in Miami, in Florida, at the house of President Donald Trump. You'd think the FBI would be in there, fingering the underwear drawer of Hunter Biden, of Joe Biden, but then, when you think of it, their underwear is not so fragrant as Melania Trump's is likely, I don't know, but likely to be. You'd think the FBI would now be bringing up charges against Hunter Biden at least, but against Joe Biden, who says he inadvertently misplaced those documents. As Edward Snowden said, I wish I'd thought of that explanation. It is prima facie a breach of the Espionage Act of 1912, self-admitted. When you have top secret documents, you're not allowed to inadvertently misplace them. And it turns out he shouldn't even have had the documents in the first place. They were not his documents, but Barack Obama's documents. He was only the vice president. But here's the clue. He was the vice president with responsibility for Ukraine. The very Ukraine where Hunter Biden was being paid $100,000 a month to sit on the board of an oil and gas company, even though the only thing he knew about gas was how to pump it into that pretty little silver Corvette behind which these top secret documents were being stashed. Are you smelling a rat yet? A big, giant rat? But in fact, there's two of them. The first is the act of inadvertently misplacing top secret documents you should never have had in Hunter Biden's garage, who can't look after his own laptop with all the incriminating material that was on it. But there's a second rat. Why now? Why are we being told about this now? First of all, the FBI had this knowledge 10 days before the midterm elections in November, which were dominated in part by Donald Trump's inadvertent misplacing of top secret documents in locked cabinets inside his own residence. But why now, in another sense? Who has brought these documents to our attention? Who tipped off the FBI about the existence of these documents, the whereabouts of these documents? Is someone determined that Joe Biden has now served his purpose and should be shuffled being the operative word, off the political stage, bringing to power President Kamala Harris? God save us. Well, here's another interesting factoid. If Joe Biden had resigned last month, Kamala Harris would have taken over as president, but would only have been able to serve one further term as president of the Republic. If he resigns next month, Kamala Harris can serve out the rest of his term and then go for 2 full presidential terms. Good timing, huh? It looks that way to me. Now, if the big guy, whoever he is, was due 10% of a payment from a foreign entity, in this case, an entity with the word China in its title, though I have no idea whether it's a Chinese company, that would have been a matter of great import, might even have been a barrier to Biden becoming president in the first place. But it would certainly, wouldn't it, be a barrier if he didn't declare the income, the 10%, if he was indeed the big guy, was getting from this foreign entity, even though he would be debarred constitutionally from receiving payments from a foreign entity. But it turns out that Joe Biden didn't even declare the $50,000 a month rent he was charging his own son, Hunter. Never mind any 10% he was receiving from foreign entities. Enough on the Biden crime family. We'll be talking to real experts about that in the course of the show. Let me turn to Davos. The private jets arrived in their hundreds. 55 heads of state and senior cabinet ministers arrived in the Swiss Alps for Davos. Britain was strongly represented by Sir Anthony Blair and Lord Peter Mandelson. That was the dead strength of the British representation at the conference. Mind you, they were busy enough, both of them meeting heads of state. I don't know how that works. How has the president of the Philippines ever heard of Peter Mandelson? Why did the president of the Philippines sit down with Sir Tony Blair? What could possibly go wrong? And what happens next? Perhaps we'll find in the ruins of the next financial year. But 55 heads of government and senior cabinet ministers and 600 CEOs of powerful international companies, and the head of the FBI, and the deputy head of the CIA. What are they doing at Davos? But they're there. What good can come of their presence there? They got out of their private jets into their Escalades and burned up the rubber and the track to get to Davos, to tell us all to fly less and drive smaller performance cars. Leave out this diesel. Go electric, everyone. As they quaffed their magnums of Cristal, what were they talking about? Well, so far, it seems that living in their heads, this time rent-free, is the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Some very stupid things have been said at Davos about the war in the Ukraine. They keep saying that Ukraine must win, even though any fool knoweth that Ukraine is now losing heavily, losing hundreds of thousands of men, dead and wounded, maimed, injured beyond repair. They know that the Russian armed forces recently reinforced and now 600,000 strong on a line stretching almost between the Black Sea and the Baltic are ready to move forward, already are moving forward, are in the center of Mariinka tonight, are threatening Bakhmut, having just taken Solidar, the city of salt. They know that the Russians are overwhelmingly winning this war, but they continue to say Russia will not be allowed to win it. So what does that mean? Does that mean that once they've fought to the last Ukrainian, that NATO is going to enter the conflict itself? Ponder that for a moment, as I've just been discussing on the glorious Kim Iverson show in the United States. Just as Mussolini went around the world threatening people with Hitler's army, so these NATO leaders at Davos are really threatening Russia with America's army, because I don't like to insult countries like the Netherlands. My own wife was born there, but trust me, the Netherlands ain't going to fight the Russian army. The Russian army that crushed Germany into ruin and ash in the center of Berlin and planted their flag. The Netherlands ain't going to fight them. Neither is Austria. Neither is France. Neither is Britain in any meaningful way. Sure, our soldiers would go there. They'd be the first there, actually. And they'd fight bravely, no doubt. But the entire strength of the British Armed Forces, Air Force, Navy, and Land Army would comfortably fit into the Manchester United ground in which I sit every other Saturday. The Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Greece are not going to fight Russia. Turkey's definitely not going to fight Russia. In fact, they'll be on Russia's side. So what does all this mean? It means that these people are threatening Russia with America's army. So those of you watching in the United States have a big decision to make. It's this: are you ready to send your sons and daughters to die in the frozen wastes of Eastern Europe for the fate of cities you can't pronounce, can't spell, and had never heard of before? As I keep saying, how much does it matter to you on which side of a border lies Kupiansk when it's been in 4 different countries in the last 100 years? But worse, much worse than that. Because if the American army fights the Russian army in Ukraine, that can only lead to one outcome: nuclear war. Think about it. If the American army began to prevail and advance towards the Russian border with its avowed intention of dismembering Russia, breaking it, balkanizing it, and taking it over for corporate America, Russia would have to use its nuclear weapons. Ditto, if the Russian army began to defeat the American army on the ground in Ukraine, America would have to use its nuclear weapons. Otherwise, Russia might roll all the way to Paris. They'd be unwise to come to London in the midst of our crime wave. Who would want to rule London? Certainly not the current mayor, who's more interested in other things that we'll come to in a minute. The use of first battlefield, then intermediate, and then in the ultimate nightmare, intercontinental ballistic missiles, of which Russia's are far better than the nuclear weapons of NATO, acknowledged by all experts, would literally end all life on this planet. And I don't even mean all human life, I mean all life. Even the fabled cockroaches could not survive the blasts, the radiation, and the nuclear winter that would ensue. So think about it. When you see this dancing girl, this dancing queen, this disco queen, Prime Minister of Finland, a fly buzzing around the Russian bear, warning, threatening, pointing her finger, clenching her fist, and declaring in her hipster way, Vladimir Putin is so over. What they're really saying is that you Americans will be required to ensure he's so over, because we in Finland couldn't fight our way out of a wet paper bag. And in any case, like all the other NATO countries, Finland merely a candidate at this point, but effectively a NATO outpost now, you've given away all your ammunition. You've given away all your weapons. Quite apart from the lack of fighting spirit, quite apart from the lack of numbers, you don't have the wherewithal to fight a war with Russia. If Russia wanted to, it could conquer Berlin. Who's going to stop it? And that brings me to my last point. The Germans have decided to send their tanks to fight Russia. Take a second to let that sink in. Leopard tanks with German insignia upon them are being given to Ukraine to fight Russians. And if they cross the lines of Lugansk and the Donbass, they'll be on Russian territory. German tanks on Russian territory. What could possibly go wrong? Think about it. Whilst your seatbelts are fully fastened, because we've got a bumpy show for you tonight. This is the mother of all talk shows.